So in my previous session, I talked about the protocols which use the video codec and how the video codec works. So now I want to dig deeper in the protocols themselves. So it's called the protocol wars, how to win and enhance user experience, because that's what it's all about. So the agenda for this session is a small introduction of the session, GPU on client versus server OS, a small technical details on that, the different protocols, the tools I used, and then we see some battle between the different codecs in different scenarios. So this session is just all about user experience. I'm not interested in throughput, CPU, or things like that, but it's all about the user experience, because from my point of view, the user experience is what matters, and the rest is something we as IT just must fix, because user experience is so important for the user, because it's a way of working. If you don't have a good user experience, your users are unhappy and they have a bad feeling about it, and they are not very productive. So again, there are so many different things to optimize user experience. So different codecs, different protocols, different settings. But what do they mean, and how can I enhance the user experience with it? So it's chaos again. So in this session, I will dig deeper into this. So first of all, if we look to the GPU in a client and server OS, it's all about the frame buffer. When we start with sizing it, and the frame buffer is a memory buffer that contains a complete frame to display, and it can be stored on the GPU in video RAM or just in a normal RAM, and it can be directly accessed by the CPU. So if we look how this works on the client OS, the frame buffer is in the video memory, which is very, very fast, and the frame can be directly rendered by NVENC if we use NVIDIA. So NVENC is the NVIDIA encoder, which is a special chip on your GPU, specially made to encode all the streams, and it can be directly accessed by the CPU. It's utilized by Citrix with NVFPC, NVIDIA Frame Buffer Capture, or DD API, Desktop Duplication API from Microsoft, to directly get the frames from the frame buffer and send them to the clients. And this really reduces the latency. So if you look at that from a picture how that works, on the left upper side you can see the graphic commands coming in to the GPU. The GPU renders the frame and it puts the frame in the front buffer. From the front buffer they are grabbed by the NVFPC directly, put through the NVENC engine and sent out as a H.264 or H.265 stream. So you can't see any CPU here. So it's completely GPU. But if you look at the server OS, it works completely different, because the server OS was never made to do graphics. It was headless, and we did remote management on it, and that's it. So the server OS has something which is called an off-screen buffer, which handles the resolution for sessions and is responsible for the communication between session and GPU driver. The frame created in the video RAM is copied to the normal RAM, and it doesn't support NVENC. So if you see here on the right down corner how it works, you can see that the CPU is also involved, and that the frame is transferred off and on between the frame buffer and the off-screen buffer, which gives latency, and it utilizes more CPU. So there's a major difference in GPU handling between client and server OS. So if you want to do high performance 3D graphics, just don't do it on server OS. So now we'll dig deeper into the different protocols, and all my information is based on Citrix, as I'm a Citrix C2P and mostly use the Citrix products. I use version 7 or 18 or above, and most of the things are partly valid for VMware Horizon as well, because VMware Horizon also uses video codecs. So Citrix has since the beginning ThinWire, which is a JPEG or bitmap compression. You can do build to lossless or always lossless. For lossless compression or build to lossless means that it's lossy for moving images, and once it is a still image, it will be lossless. You have many different compression policies. It can utilize client-side bitmap caching, but there's no hardware encoding from an NVIDIA perspective. But it's very bandwidth efficient for static content, and even the image quality for static content is really good. So the use case here is pure Office. So if you have users with only Word and Excel sheets, then you can stick with ThinWire. But it's not so good with moving images like video, like YouTube. Therefore, Citrix created H2X 3D Pro, which uses H264. And you have different quality levels, which only change the quality and reduce the bandwidth. It uses YUV 420, so it does color compression. But it's good compression and visual quality is very good. It can utilize the NVENC engine, even if you're on a server OS, but that adds latency. But Chroma subsampling yields blurred text. So if you remember my slides from the previous session, with 420, you can have blurred text because colors tend to move into each other. But it's very bandwidth efficient, especially for video or moving images. So a use case is 3D CAD of heavily video usage. If you have a software like AutoCAD, 2D CAD with sharp contrasts, then it's better to use lossless because it utilizes YUV 444. And it can still use hardware encoding, but it just doesn't use Chroma subsampling. It's great for sharp graphics as well as text, but it increases the bandwidth a lot. So as I said at the beginning, 2D CAD or high color accuracy requirements like medical images and so on. If you want to utilize less bandwidth, you can switch to H265, which is better compression than H264. It requires hardware encoding because it uses 8 times more CPU. It's very bandwidth efficient, but it only works on Windows endpoints with hardware decoding enabled. And the use case is 3D CAD in low bandwidth scenarios. So if you have very low bandwidth, you can utilize this to be able to put more people on the same connection. And then there's a new one. It's called Selective H264 or for active changing regions. And it auto selects between ThinWire, H264 or H265 even. It can use hardware encoding. It's not needed, but it works better because it reduces CPU usage. And it's very good image quality for static content because it uses bitmap or JPEG rendering, and low bandwidth requirements for moving images because it's using H264. But it can't use NVFBC, so there is a latency hit because NVFBC can only grab a complete frame and not part of it. Use cases, Office usage with some YouTube or other multimedia. And this is an example of how the protocol works. So it detects in the green bars the video and also the static images and the text. So the static images are bitmapped because they are cached then on the client side, and the blue parts are text, which are utilizing JPEG rendering. But another one we can use is H.264 built-to lossless or H.265 built-to lossless, because it sends lossy images to the user during periods of high network activity. So for example, if you have a 3D image and you rotate it, during the rotation it uses lossy compression, but that doesn't matter because our eyes can't focus on every frame. We can't see moving images very sharp, so it doesn't matter. But from the moment that you stop moving your image, it switched to lossless, YUV444 even. So this even reduces the network activity because it only has to send one frame, one lossless frame to the client instead of many lossless frames. But you can see a sharpening effect, which can be annoying if you look too closely. It can utilize NVENC, and chroma subsampling is less problematic because it's only used for moving images or videos. So use cases also here, 2D CAD with low bandwidth. So I created a comparison which can be used for later use on how to set all the settings for the different types, because some types even need some configuration on the client for Citrix. For example, H.265 needs to have hardware acceleration for graphics enabled on the client side as well, because you need to enable H.265 decoding for graphics, because it can't be done on the CPU. So before I'm gonna show you some different codecs in real life, I just want to mention some tools I use. So the first one is RD Analyzer. Ryan is one of the members as well, one of the developers. He will do a session later on. And we have two other members, Bram and Barry, who built this tool from the beginning. And with RD Analyzer, you can switch policies instantly for Citrix, VMware, and RDP. And you can monitor CPU and GPU usage. It costs around 50 euros a year. It's updated regularly, so it's a really great tool for testing purposes. Another one, which was a session before me, was Rex Analytics from Benny, which I also used for the demonstration I want to show you guys. So let's start the battle. So just before I start, I created a small test environment with a simple client, an Intel NUC with an i7 and 32 GB of RAM. I also use it sometimes for hypervisor, so that's why the high RAM amount. It ran Windows 10 1809 build with Citrix Workspace app 1903, which was latest at the moment. The VDA was sized with 2 vCPU, 6 GB of RAM. I used the NVIDIA P4 2Q profile with grid 8.0. I used CVAD 1903 and I ran it on Windows 10 1803. To do the testing, I used the frame grabber because with Rex you need to grab the frames for later analytics. So I used the Elgato, which is around 150 euros. And for the one emulation I will do in a session, I use the opposite, Linktropy. And you can use that to simulate different bandwidth scenarios, introduce jitter, latency, packet loss, and so on. So I created 4 tests. 3D CAD on LAN environment, 10 wire versus H.264. 3D CAD on a 4 megabit connection, H.264 versus built-in lossless. An office worker on a 2 megabit connection. I did a comparison just to show you the differences between the codecs. And the last one is an office worker on a 2 megabit connection, where I will show you the difference between H.264 and built-in lossless. So let's switch to the first demo. So this is thin wire versus H.264, where thin wire is in the upper left corner and H.264 is in the upper right corner. And in the bottom of the screen you can see the GPU usage and the encoder usage. As I told earlier, thin wire doesn't use the GPU encoder, so that's why there's a blank space there. And on the right side you can see the GPU encoder encoding the frames. They are both on high quality with a maximum frame rate of 60 frames per second. And in just a few seconds you will see the difference between the two codecs and how many frames per second are rendered. And you can even see that because on the left side thin wire can't output that many frames, the GPU usage is lower. So you can really see the difference here between a JPEG compression and a H.264 video compression. It's just much smoother. So the second demo is the difference between H.264 and build-to-lossless. So on the upper left corner I have H.264. On the right corner I have build-to-lossless, and you can already see sometimes the sharpening effect. So you'll see that on the left side the screen is sometimes a bit blurry. You can see it here around the dots, and on the right side you will see a crystal clear image. So you can see really the clarifying process there. But as they use both the H.264 encoder, they both use the GPU, and the performance is around the same. But the right side is more sharp if the rotation stops. So next up is a 2 megabit comparison for an office worker with all the different types you can imagine. So thin wire, selective H.264 or for active changing regions, H.264 and H.265. And the fun part I saw here is that you can see there's a difference in how images are sent. Because with thin wire you can see a sort of delay before an image pops up. You don't have that with a video codec because it encodes the entire screen and it doesn't do any smart things with it. So if we look here at the text, it's hardly readable, while thin wire is very readable. And even H.265 tends to be a bit blurry. So here you can really see that video codecs aren't made for static text with YUV 420. So the last one is that if you want to use H.264 or for the compression, you can use build-to-lossless. So as you can see, at the right side, the build-to-lossless tends to sharpen, while the left side remains blurry. But as said earlier, they both use the GPU, they both use the GPU encoder, and the bandwidth is around the same. But the right side is just more sharp. So as a conclusion, there's an option for every situation. So there's a codec for every situation you want to have, but you need to choose wisely. And you need to use testing tools and perform user tests to validate your environment. So thanks. I don't know if there are any questions.